This channel seems to have gotten a reputation for reviewing bad budget games, but in all reality I was just very curious of obscure games I haven't played before, so that's not really all I'm going to do, as evidenced by this video today. Today, let's analyze Battlefield Bad Company. Hey everyone, Jarek the Gaming Dragon here. If you're already subscribed and you haven't clicked that bell, be sure to do that, otherwise YouTube won't tell you that I posted anything. If you haven't subscribed, well, watch this video and maybe consider subscribing if you like it. So I actually never played Bad Company back in the day. I played a lot of Bad Company 2's multiplayer, but that was because Bad Company 1 never came out on PC, and I had a lot of other games to play when Bad Company 1 came out. So you could say I had the Bad Company experience from playing Bad Company 2, but the single player was entirely new to me. Just not really the gameplay, if that makes sense. Bad Company 1 is backwards compatible, so I played it on my Xbox One. How does this work? Well, you put in your Bad Company disc and then you can just play it on your Xbox One, but I mean a little bit more than that. Really, what does this mean? Well, effectively the Xbox One is emulating a 360. There's a few select games that are Xbox One X enhanced, meaning if you had an Xbox One X, your games are going to be running much better with those specific titles. For example, Halo 3 is a backwards compatible game. It's also Xbox One X enhanced, so if you play it on an Xbox One X, it won't be constrained to the original low resolution of the Xbox 360 and all the problems that plagued that last gen. Unfortunately, the list of games that are enhanced is very short, and Battlefield Bad Company is not one of them. This means this game runs at the same settings that the original 360 ran at. You're only going to be getting 720p, and you're only going to be getting 30 FPS. That said, you do get minor improvements. Frame rate is more stable, screen tearing is gone, and loading times are faster. But again, you still have all the problems of a last-gen console. The resolution is only 720p and is simply blown up to whatever native resolution you're playing at, making anti-aliasing not look very good. There will be jaggies all over your screen. The game only runs a max of 30 FPS, although it stays locked at 30 and doesn't dip below that. That said, the original 360 actually did a decent job running Bad Company. It did very rarely dip below 30 FPS, but it did a lot better job than most other 360 games of the time. So honestly, if you only have a 360 and you want to give this game a go again, don't feel bad about not emulating it or having it being backwards compatible on your Xbox One. It will still run mostly fine. The improvements you get with the Xbox One are nice, but they're marginal, they're not game-changing. Now I know what you're about to say, oh boy, Jarek's gonna rant for 5 years about the FOV, but actually, I'm not. A lot of people expect me to, but this was a console-only game. And yeah, the FOV does suck, it's only around 55, but that's what I expected. I feel like part of the reason people get so angry about me ranting about the FOV for so long is that they were trained to deal with these terrible FOVs. That's what the last generation only gave them. Keep in mind, the last console generation was very underpowered because it lasted for so long. They had to do everything possible to get as much power out of it that they could, including restricting the FOV to render less on screen at one time. This is why you saw considerably worse FOVs as the years went along on these consoles. So even though you're sitting farther away from the screen, they were still pretty bad, but that was kind of what they had to do. If you didn't do that, the game would have ran at 20 FPS instead of the 30 target they were trying to reach. I mean, the Xbox 360 and the PS3 had 512 megabytes of RAM. It's actually kind of astounding to me that they can get a game like Bad Company running on it at all, especially since graphically this game looked pretty good for 2008. Now, keep in mind Crysis did come out the year before, and Far Cry 2 also came out in 2008, so it's behind those two games, but at the same time, Crysis and Far Cry 2 didn't offer the destructibility that Bad Company did. Sure, you could take down sheet metal, and there was a ton of physics happening in Crysis, but not quite the destructibility that Bad Company had. In fact, as a whole, Bad Company still holds up surprisingly well. The textures look a little muddy and pretty outdated, but for a 2008 game, it still looks pretty good. It's a big shame it wasn't on PC because then it could look even better. In fact, it still blows my mind that there was a Battlefield game that didn't come out on PC. That kind of seems silly to me, but hey, we take what we got. The plot in Bad Company is not particularly deep or super serious, but it's easy to follow and very entertaining all the way through. You're in a 4-man fire team called B Company, more commonly referred to as Bad Company, hence the name of the game. Bad Company is composed of people that made mistakes elsewhere. Maybe they would have gotten court-martialed, gone to jail, but instead, they're thrown onto the Bad Company unit. Effectively, you're cannon fodder. You take the more risky missions instead of being thrown to jail or whatever other punishment you would have had to take. Your squad consists of 4 members. Sweetwater, your squad's hesitant nerd. Haggard, your squad's village idiot. And Redford, the sergeant. You play as Preston Marlowe. the new guy who just transferred into Bad Company that day. You might be saying Marlowe kind of looks more like a generic white guy FPS protagonist, and you'd kind of be right. He doesn't have as much personality as the other ones, but it does still exist, and it's better than being entirely silent in this experience. Regardless, most of the time you are seeing the world through his eyes, so you don't quite notice it as much. Now, Sweetwater, Haggard, and Marlowe all made mistakes to become part of Bad Company, but Sargent didn't. He willingly chose this so he could have a shorter term. In fact, right at the beginning of the game, he tells the player that his term is over in 3 days. Immediately after being introduced to your new squad mates, you're put on your first batch of missions, and Sweetwater notices something. You're fighting Legionnaire mercenaries. According to myth, the Legionnaires are possibly the deadliest army in the world, but also, their members are paid in gold. Well, Sweetwater finds a solid gold bar on one of these mercenaries, and your squad suddenly wants a little bit more of it. The mission quickly turns into finding more gold for your squad mates. This leads to your squad finding Legionnaires loading up a supply truck full of gold. They follow the truck, and the truck ends up driving past a border into a neutral state. Well, Haggard, being the smart person he is, decides to run in. You have now attacked a neutral state, and Sargent makes a decision to go in after him. You can see where this is going. The military is not happy about this at all. Sargent covers for Haggard's mistake, and he's subject to court-martial, meaning his shortly to end 3-day term suddenly is no longer a thing anymore. However, instead of doing that, the US military just declares them AWOL, and sends them into some other missions. Well, the military cuts contact entirely with your squad, leaving you truly AWOL for you to do whatever you want. And your squad decides, well, we're already stuck in this place, let's go find the gold. These are basically the clip notes of the story. I could tell you how one situation leads into another with great detail, but I don't find that to be as important as to why it's so good. Because the story isn't really that deep, and at times it can be rather silly, but that's fine. The reason it's so entertaining is the interactions between your squad mates. They're genuinely funny and amusing. I found myself frequently stopping as I'm streaming while the game is happening, not even in a cutscene, just to hear two of my squad mates talking to each other. Generally Sweetwater and Haggard, only to have Sargent to tell one of them to shut up. Even when they're not speaking, they're still entertaining through body language. When Sargent is talking to head command, usually Haggard and Sweetwater are doing something in the background. Maybe they're playing rock, paper, scissors, or maybe Sweetwater is teaching Haggard how to fix his golf swing by using a shotgun as a golf club. This is definitely a story based on your squad, and you do care about these characters. They're entertaining, and you want to see more. Which is far more than I can say about what happened to Battlefield after Bad Company 2. I consider Battlefield, Bad Company 1, and Bad Company 2 to be the last good single-player Battlefield games. Battlefield 3 and 4 turned into this dark, gritty, wannabe Hollywood movie that just isn't written well and is overall annoying. The gameplay is heavily scripted for a story you have no interest in. Can you even remember the name of the main character in Battlefield 3? I can't. Meanwhile, Bad Company 1 and 2 manages to not be scripted, let the player go at their own pace, give you large areas to move around in, while also still having interesting characters and an interesting story. And let's talk about the gameplay, because at the time it was pretty different from what Battlefield did in the past. First off, there's a huge improvement from the previous Battlefield games as far as just production value goes. These weapons are modeled well, even though they're a little silly. Assault rifles hold 50 rounds in the mag, the reloads aren't always logical. That's fine, the production value is still there, reloading animations are smooth, and oh my goodness, this sound design is amazing. Now this isn't news, we know how good Battlefield's sound design is, but every time I play a Battlefield game, I'm just blown away by it, especially Bad Company. The sound from when you're walking inside of a building to outside of a building firing your gun is just so amazing to me. I've had numerous times while I was streaming when I was playing that I momentarily lifted one of the ears of my headset to notice the sound was actually coming from in-game, not from outside my window. Bad Company does an amazing job portraying the pure chaos happening around you. You hear gunfire outside of the building, you hear gunfire in the building, you hear explosions randomly everywhere, and the only downside to doing this in the single player is that it just kind of reminds you how much better and more chaotic the multiplayer was. But that's not to say the single player was bad. The multiplayer was just more chaotic. And the most important change Bad Company made from the previous Battlefield games is Destructibility. And it was new at the time. Sure, Destructibility had been played with before, but never to this extent. This game came out in 2008, and let me tell you, your 11-year-old memory of you breaking through a wall and shooting every unsuspecting person in that room stays true. It is exactly how you remember it, and it happened exactly the way you remembered it. It is a very satisfying experience, and it never got old. I know I said I didn't play Bad Company 1 before, and that's true, but I did play Bad Company 2, and the gameplay is very similar. When they put a memory that vivid in your head, you know that game is doing something right. That said, I do have complaints, and almost no game is flawless, so here they are. Battlefield was inherently made to be a sandbox game, and that means everyone has a different role. This ultimately means that some people are going to like one role more than another one. For example, in a multiplayer match, maybe you have one person that wants to play strictly infantry. They'll still use vehicles to get from point A to point B, but they won't willingly get into a tank and do that all game. Meanwhile, you have another person that maybe just wants to get into AA and then fuck off to the back of the map like that dickhead that he is, yeah, I'm calling you out. Or maybe another person just wants to fly in a helicopter or fly a jet. And that's fine. Battlefield is a sandbox game, made for choice. And when maps are designed well, they accommodate every style of play without hurting one specific style of player. The problem with a single player game is that you don't have a squad to pick up these roles you don't want to do, inherently meaning you're going to have to do a role at some point that you find very boring. In my case, I'm an infantry player. I don't care much for vehicles. I do use them because they're there and you use all the tools at your disposal, but I don't want to use them. There are many sections in the single player that are made for vehicles. Sure, you can go infantry and huff it all the way, but that's a very long distance and you're probably going to have to fight tanks. So you probably should be using the tanks at your disposal. I always just wanted to get these parts out of the way. I didn't find them fun. I found them really boring. I just wanted to use guns and keep going. But I also had other problems with them. The other problems being that if you don't have a vehicle repair tool and you have a tank and there are other tanks fighting against you, well, inevitably your tank is going to blow up, meaning now you're stuck on foot. And if there's not an ammo box anywhere near you, you're just fucked. And this will probably happen a lot. These missions aren't fail-proof, and that's the problem I have. If you don't know what's happening ahead of time, you can make that part really, really tedious and obnoxious to deal with. To make matters worse, when you die in these parts, you don't restart from the last checkpoint, you just respawn to the last checkpoint. All your vehicles that you used are in the same spot, so if you used a tank and it blew up, you don't have that tank anymore. Thankfully, the enemies you did damage to stay with that damage, and the enemies you got rid of are still gone. But it still would probably be better if you just reloaded from the last checkpoint and had the vehicles that you need. Yeah, these vehicle sections could have used a lot of work, and I didn't like any of them. But the worst one out of them all was definitely the helicopter mission. I hate flying helicopters. Battlefield is notorious for making helicopters somewhat difficult to fly. If you're an experienced player, these controls are probably better, but if you don't want to fly them, you probably don't want to learn how to fly them, you just want to get this mission out of the way. They're not terribly difficult to fly, but they're also not straightforward, and the whole mission is just really tedious. I didn't want to do it. But to make matters even worse, if you like inverted flying controls, but don't like inverted on the ground controls, too bad. Inverted controls are either on or off, doesn't matter if you're in a vehicle or not. This is annoying because I don't like inverted controls if I'm on the ground using a gun, but I do like inverted controls if I'm in a plane or flying a helicopter. Think of it like this. Put your controller flat on your desk. The right analog stick is what you use to pitch your helicopter. So if I push the analog stick forward, that would be like the right analog stick being the helicopter, and the front of the analog stick going down, me pushing it forward. But if you don't have it inverted, then the front of the helicopter goes up because you're pushing up. This confuses my brain, and I would like it if it just had an inverted helicopter option instead of just inverting everything. You might be saying, well, why don't you just leave it inverted for that mission? Well, because for that mission, you do have to get out of the helicopter numerous times. And for that matter, the controls in this game are sort of ass in general. Aiming isn't that difficult. It's as good as you can make it with a controller, which admittedly isn't that great, but it's not the worst I've ever used. The problem is the button layout, and you can't bind it to whatever you want. For example, Y is to knife people, which is a very strange thing in my mind that I still never got used to it. I kept pressing Y to try to swap weapons. If you're sprinting, you can't do anything. Now, when I say you can't do anything, you might expect that because you're sprinting, but I also mean that if you push a button while you're sprinting, nothing happens. You press the knife button while you're sprinting, nothing happens. You have to wait for the sprint animation to stop completely before you're able to do anything, including swap weapons. At the very least, I would expect it to register my input and do it as soon as I'm done sprinting, but no, nothing happens, you have to wait. And speaking of weapons, that was another complaint I had because you can only carry one weapon, unless you have a sniper kit, which then you have a sniper and a pistol, which also means that you don't have an explosive, which is a bit of a problem because this whole game is based around putting holes in walls. So if you're running with an M416, you just have an M416 and the swap weapons button pulls out the grenade launcher, that's all you got. If you're running with a shotgun or something that doesn't have a grenade launcher, you'll just have a regular grenade, which is nowhere near as useful because it won't put holes in walls and just isn't as easy to use. Keep in mind, you get a lot of ammo, which is a good thing because it really encourages you to spam explosives everywhere to punch holes in walls. Grenade launchers aren't overpowered, so you won't be getting many kills this way, but it's a really useful tool. Not having that tool puts you at a really big disadvantage. To make matters worse, you'll find collectibles throughout the map, and some of those collectibles are new weapons that you haven't had a chance to use before. But I frequently found numerous new weapons sitting next to each other. Maybe I wouldn't get a chance to use these ever again in the entire game, so it forced me to choose only one of those and never use the other one.
Some sort of explosive, whether it's a grenade launcher or not. Oh my god. Why are there so many good weapons? I want to use all of them.
A very big part of Battlefield has always been gun porn. and I can only use one at a time. Limiting my uses is really frustrating. I would like to use all the weapons that I see around, not maybe carry all of them at the same time, but at least let me carry 2. The grenade launcher is a great utility tool, yes, but limiting my options really limited what I could do with guns in game. I would like to use shotguns more, but they had limited range, even for Battlefield, so I kind of just didn't use them. They're fun and great up close, but most of Battlefield isn't up close. And since I couldn't carry another weapon to offset that downside, I just never used them. But I mean, just sitting there looking at 2 weapons that are so cool and you want to use both of them, but you can't use both of them. You can just look at them. Nice. It's not a good feeling. Definitely would have made the game more fun if I could have experimented with more of the weapon sandbox. But by far the worst controls are when you're driving something like a Jeep or a tank. L is gas. Why is L gas? And you only have 2 different control schemes, neither of which are good. Oh, also reverse is X. Yeah, you can get what I'm saying. These controls are terrible. Again, my biggest problem isn't necessarily that the vehicles are there. They're just that you don't have an option. And that's a problem. Battlefield has always been a sandbox game, meaning you have a choice. That's the best part about Battlefield. You can choose to be infantry, you can choose to fly a jet, you can choose to fly in a helicopter, you can choose a tank, you can choose to put C4 on your ATV and launch yourself across the entire damn map. It's your choice, it's a sandbox. But in single player, that choice is taken away at certain points in the game. And I don't like that. The parts where you have a choice of just how do you approach the enemy and do whatever you want to do are genuine fun. And nothing can take that away. In fact, if you just remove the vehicle sections out of my mind entirely, I have nothing but praise about this game. The gunplay is so good. Blasting holes through walls is incredibly satisfying. There's not many things I can really complain about. And if you want to go back and play this game again, I would recommend you to. The servers unfortunately have been shut down, but hey, the single player is still fun, so go give that a try. The memories you have playing this single player campaign will be exactly the same that you had back in the day. Thankfully, Bad Company 2 is on PC, which will make that video a lot easier to make. Sometime in the future, I'll be streaming that, so if you want to come join me streaming that, check out my Twitch, twitch.tv/JerrickForGamingDragon. Thank all of you that joined my stream while I was streaming this game. If you like these videos and you want to help me, consider subscribing on Twitch. You will see these videos one day ahead of time. Same thing goes to my patrons. If you want to go to my Patreon, click that link in the bottom right. If you want to watch my other videos, click them somewhere on the screen. Thank all of you for watching, and I will see you next video.